What up, Wizards? It's Dev. Big day today, man. The other day, we got a couple of Commander spoilers for the Final Fantasy set, and those are fun to cover. But today, we got some honest to Sephiroth standard legal Final Fantasy spoilers. About 12 of them, as a matter of fact, and a ton of these look really, really good. I've already said before that it's going to be hard to hide my excitement for the Final Fantasy set. I know that Universes Beyond isn't everyone's thing, and especially the fact that these are going to be standard legal really isn't everyone's thing, but I have been looking forward to this set for more or less two-thirds or three-quarters of my life, something like that. So I'm really excited about a lot of these cards, especially some of them that we got to see today. So excuse my excitement. Let's go ahead and start looking at some cards. All hype aside, there has to be a first card of the day, which does not mean that this is going to be a bad Magic card I'm about to show you, but I do think that it's going to be a pretty divisive design, especially when you see the name of the card, which is admittedly a pretty dumb name for a Magic card. But let me just go on record and say that I really like the design space inherent in Side Quest. This one is called Side Quest Catch a Fish. It's 3 mana, 2 and a white for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. If it's an artifact or creature card, you may reveal it and put it into your hand. If you put a card into your hand this way, make a food token and transform this enchantment into Cooking Campsite. This is a land. That's all right. Taps for a white. That's even better. You can pay 3 and tap it and sack an artifact to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control at sorcery speed. That's even better. Now, this enchantment in particular is not Caretaker's Talent or any of the other 3 mana enchantments we have access to in a bunch of different formats that allow us to draw cards in white. This is not even close to any of those. It's going to feel really bad if you play this on turn 3 and don't do much else, and then on turn 4 you hit a land with it. It's really bad, but once it does transform, well, it's a little bit of ramp. It's untapped ramp. I guess that's kind of cool, right? And eventually it can buff your entire team for a few mana. Altogether, I think there's a lot of cool stuff about this card, even though I'm not sure how powerful it actually is. All that said, again, when it comes to the design space of these side quests, I think it's actually really cool. We might see some really cheap enchantments that turn into lands or even something else. I could see a side quest eventually transforming into an artifact that you get at the end of it. Or maybe there's a card that transforms and gives you a couple of treasure tokens in the meantime because you would get treasure from doing a side quest, right? I don't know. Again, there's some cool design space here that I think there's going to be a lot of fun in exploring. So I like the idea of side quests, but I'm not sure how much I love Side Quest : as a templating device for a series of cards, right? But still, altogether, I do think there's going to be some cool cards in this cycle. But next, I guess we should go ahead and get directly into the beloved characters portion of the video and look at Tonberry over here. Just an uncommon, but a really good looking one, man. This is a single black mana for a 2/1 that enters tapped with a stun counter on it. But it also has Chef's Knife. During your turn, this creature has First Strike and Deathtouch. Let's go, man. This won't be able to attack until turn 3, even if you play it on turn 1. But that said, once it does attack, it kind of attacks like a Glissa, First Strike and Deathtouch is a ridiculous combination, so your opponent's probably just going to let this in more often than not. I guess the issue with Master Tonberry here is that, I guess this isn't the Master Tonberry. I wonder if we'll get a separate card, but either way, he doesn't really have any super relevant creature types, which you usually want on your Savannah Lions type guy, but I'm not really going to begrudge him that too much. I think this guy is really, really cool. I just really like the design on this, and I get the feeling that I'm going to give a lot of cards in this set some slack because I really like how they represent the character's abilities and stuff, but in this case, I don't have to give the card slack. It's just pretty obviously a pretty solid card for aggressive black decks moving forward, and I like it. But another uncommon 1-drop we should talk about, definitely, is Sazh's Chocobo from Final Fantasy 13 here. This is a single green mana for a 0/1 bird with landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Now, we've definitely had our share of aggressive 1-drop landfall creatures in the past, right? We've had Scythe Leopard, and probably more famously, and better cards, to be honest, Akoum Hellhound and Step Lynx. Those are capable of getting large all at one time, which the Chocobo is not necessarily capable of doing, but in some ways I like this better. I've already said a bunch of times in a million spoiler seasons that I really enjoy 1-drops that get better over time, but usually you have to pay some amount of mana or something like that for an activated ability or something to get some value out of them or whatever. In this case, you're just playing Magic and your 1-drop's getting better. You don't even have to, an evolving adaptive or something, you don't have to drop other creatures in order to increase its power, just play Magic and drop lands. So your 1-drop will be a 3/4 fairly quickly. Especially if you're ramping lands, and like I assume you are. Plus, just this on turn 1 into a Bristly Bill on turn 2. Seems like you're probably getting this thing's power increase like really, really quickly. Also goes kind of nicely with hardened scales and formats that have access to it, right? Because again, you're just playing lands, and this thing's getting pretty big pretty fast. In Standard, I think we got a pretty interesting landfall pile cooking up. You can go a little bit fast with it. You've got Iridescent Vine Lasher and now this in the 1-drop slot. So like 8 potential 1-drops with landfall is actually really cool for a deck like that. I don't know. There's a lot of things I'm really interested in when it comes to this card. I think it could be super playable in multiple formats. Probably goes in every Commander landfall deck. I assume they want it, but even all the way up to Standard, Pioneer, and stuff like that, I think that they could definitely fit this into a bunch of existing decks. But if landfall's going to be a deck, I think that this is kind of the card that's going to finally get it over the finish line. And yes, that was a Chocobo racing joke I slipped in there at the end, but let's move on to another uncommon. It's Summon Shiva. This is neat. It's a saga, so it's an enchantment. It works just the way a saga normally does. You sacrifice it on chapter 3 and all that. But it's also a creature, so check this thing out. This is 5 mana, 3 and 2 blue for a 4/5 enchantment creature Saga Elemental. The first 2 chapters are called Heavenly Strike. Tap target creature an opponent controls, put a stun counter on it. And on chapter 3, you get Diamond Dust, the Shiva attack. Draw a card for each tapped creature your opponents control. By the way, this is specifically the Shiva from Final Fantasy X. They want you to know that. First of all, I want to say, just like the side quest, I just like the inherent design of this. How many summons are we going to get, and how cool is the Bahamut summon going to be? What's the Ifrit summon going to be like? Ramu? Like, I don't know. I kind of can't wait to see a good number of these. I think, again, this is a really just like cool design space. I thought that the side quest design space was interesting. Well, also a little bit cool, right? This, well, lacking in some cool, but this I think is much more cool than it is interesting, but it's still like a little bit interesting, right? Kind of the inverse, but I don't know. Altogether, I think the card itself, this one we're looking at here, is like so kind of strong looking. You have to be really good to be playable at 5 mana in Standard. So I'm not really sure this cuts the mustard or anything. You probably want to put it on ice, but ultimately I'm gonna see if this thing can do anything. It's a 4/5 with no real keyword abilities, and that kind of sucks, but it's still kind of a beefy power toughness for what you're paying for it. And you get a couple of like removal spells, like while it's out, you get to tap their dudes down and put stun counters on them, eventually draw a couple of cards for the trouble, right? So I don't know, you can proliferate and put more counters on it, and maybe that'll do a thing. Like, I don't know, dude. It's a pretty cool looking card, in my opinion. Again, it might cost a little bit too much, but I want to see. And if nothing else, might be really fun and limited. But the final uncommon I want to look at today is Garland, Knight of Cornelia. This is a red and a black for a 3/2 legendary human knight. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, surveil 1. You can also pay 7 mana, 3/2 black and 2 red to return this card from your graveyard to the battlefield transformed at sorcery speed. It comes in transformed as Chaos the Endless. This is a 5/5 legendary demon with flying, and when it dies, you put it on the bottom of its owner's library. Now, I'm going to be all the way honest here. I believe that they kind of did my boy dirty here. Slightly, like Final Fantasy 1 is the first Final Fantasy that I ever played. I was 5 years old. I was kind of the perfect age to experience most of the series, so I love Final Fantasy. I've said it a million times. I'm not going to belabor it too much here, but I played this game with my dad when I was like 5 years old, and it sort of cemented my love for the series all the way back at the first game. And this is both the first character and the last character that you fight in this game, spoilers and all that, but you fight Garland as the first boss, like 10 minutes into the game. You fight Chaos, like 30 hours into the game as the final boss. And I just kind of, I guess, wanted more. Maybe we'll get another version of Garland, but I really don't know that we will. Chaos over here, the final boss of an entire game. Really, really scary dude. Just a 5/5 flyer. Doesn't even have Flample. So, it's just a little disappointed that this is a final boss, the whole guy, the guy in a game. And you get a 5/5 flyer. But, as far as the function of the card actually goes, let me praise it a little bit, because on the front half, this is a 3 mana, or 2 mana rather, 3/2. which also has some gravy on it. You know, casting removal spells and being able to surveil is actually kind of cool. You know, casting your Unholy Annex a turn after this and being able to surveil is actually pretty cool. So I don't hate the face of the card. And even though 7 mana is kind of a lot, you know, they're going to cut it down or kill it in some way or dies in combat or whatever. And then later on in the game, it's actually a pretty decent option to have to bring back from your graveyard to your, you know, battlefield. Because the 5/5 flyer is actually pretty scary if all other resources have been exhausted. So maybe this dude's a little bit better than I'm judging him and they didn't actually do him dirty, but I think there's a reason he's uncommon. The activated ability is a little bit expensive, even if it is supposed to be a late game, you know, pull in case of emergency thing. But either way, I kind of liked the design. I saw where they were going, but I feel like they could have gone a little farther. But let's move on to the rares today and just keep looking at characters I love. Here's Sin, Spira's Punishment from FF10 here. This is a neat card, man. 7 mana, 4 and Sultai colors for a 7/7 legendary Leviathan avatar with flying. Whenever Sin enters or attacks, exile a permanent card from your graveyard at random. Then create a tapped token that's a copy of that card. If the exiled card is a land card, repeat this process. So I guess if all the cards in your graveyard are lands, and this is kind of like having Alumbra in your command zone, but I guess you could already have Alumbra in your command zone. This gives you more colors to play than Alumbra and allows you to play like Muldrotha and stuff. And it's good stuff. It's not bad. You can play this in Muldrotha, and that might be cool because you've got plenty of things in your graveyard that you want to hit with this. So altogether, really, really neat. It's going to be kind of weird to hit a permanent at random. So like you take all the permanents out of your graveyard in paper and you just shuffle them around and like hit one at random, I guess. And that could be really fun, but I guess the way you really want to play this is to just have a few specific permanents in your yard that you want to hit with this. In standard, I think it might be a little bit too expensive, but there's a lot of fun graveyard tricks that you might want to try out with this. And I do kind of like that even if your opponent blows this away, it at least got you some value, and sometimes it'll give you like land dude. So all that seems really, really good. It doesn't look like the best reanimator target in standard, but I guess if you play your cards right, you could make this like better than an Atali pretty definitely, at least as far as the enters the battlefield trigger goes. And don't forget that it also has a freaking attacks trigger. So like, you know, if this ever survives to attack for one turn, or if you're able to reanimate it with haste somehow and get, you know, 2 triggers in the same turn, then you could definitely be cooking something, man. So I like it a good bit. I actually do. We'll see what it does in standard ultimately. But again, looks fun in a command zone. But we'll move on to Stiltzkin, Moogle Merchant over here from Final Fantasy IX. This is a single white mana for a 1/2 legendary Moogle with lifelink. You can pay 2 and tap it. Target opponent gains control of another target permanent you control. If they do, you get to draw a card. Okay, the evil things you can do with this, you know. First of all, I'll say again, in your command zone, you probably do some funky stuff with this. It sucks that you're relegated to just mono white in that case. I'm not really sure what all you can do with it, but maybe there's some fun artifacts you can trade to your opponent or something. I could see it, but in standard and beyond, right? Pioneer, Explorer, Modern, I don't know. There's things you could definitely do with this just in standard. There's obviously Demonic Pacts. Do you make that deck Mardu now so you can incorporate this and Harmless Offering? But I don't know, man. There's a few things that you might want to donate in a bunch of formats right now. So I like the space on this. You know, again, I'm not sure how incredible it actually is, but if nothing else, it is a 1 mana 1/2 lifelink. And, you know, despite the fact that it doesn't have too many great creature types, just Moogle, I don't know what you're doing with that, but it is a legend. So, you know, in some sort of Plaza of Heroes or Joda deck or something like that in standard that just wants cheap legends, this could find a slot if you have a thing that is worth donating, you know, even if you don't. So I don't know, man. There's a lot of things to like about the little Moogle here, and I just kind of like Moogles in general. I think this is one of those cases where I'm giving a card some slack because I like the character. So it might be happening, but again, I do think that like this allows Wizards to print like even more donatable stuff, and like we can really get up to some evil tricks. And by the way, peep the beautiful promo art on this card. Just absolutely gorgeous. I'll give you another 3 seconds to check it out while I run my mouth, but we got to move on here eventually to more rares because there's a few more. We got to look at Cecil. I always said Cecil. Dark Knight here. A single black mana for a 2/3 legendary human knight with Deathtouch and Darkness. Whenever Cecil deals damage, you lose that much life. Then, if your life total is less than or equal to your starting life total, untap Cecil and transform him. This guy's from Final Fantasy IV, but in the States, we called it Final Fantasy II. This is the second Final Fantasy game I ever played with my dad, and it's probably like my third favorite Final Fantasy game ever. Past Final Fantasy 6, 7, then this one, then 1, although this is always fighting with 1. But anyway, it transforms into Cecil, Redeemed Paladin, a 4/4 legendary human knight with lifelink and protect. Whenever Cecil attacks, other attacking creatures gain indestructible until end of turn. It's wild. That's pretty good. And it's not like super hard to transform. Just get down to half your starting life total. No big deal. He helps you do that. And I kind of like that he helps you do that in a standard where we just got Death's Shadow. We just got The Last Ride in standard. And this is a very cool 1-drop in your black decks to go alongside that one. It's actually the second aggressive black 1-drop that we've seen today. And let's be honest, 1 mana 2/3 Deathtouch, I don't care if it's hitting me for damage at the same time. That is an unbelievable rate. It still dies to cut down and bolt effects and nowhere to run and virtual persistence and all the stuff. So there's definitely checks and balances on this card in standard. But I'll just say it again, dude, a 1 mana 2/3, that is better than an Asamaru, and it has a keyword ability. That's wild. Cool character here, one of my favorite characters of all time. I love his story. It's the best part of Final Fantasy IV in a lot of ways, except for maybe Tella. I do like me some Tella stuff, but either way, Rydia, God, every character in that game is really good. Kain, I just can't wait till we see cards for these people. But either way, Cecil. Cecil, this card, actually, I think they did my dude right this time. But the card that I see the most people talking about from this whole batch of cards today is Jumbo Cactuar. The one with the mustache. This one is from Final Fantasy VIII. It is 7 mana, 5 and 2 green for a 1/7 plant with 10,000 needles. Whenever this creature attacks, it gets 9,999 plus 0 until end of turn. It gets quad 9s plus 0 until end of turn. Max damage, absolutely ridiculous card. And this is actually pretty dumb, right? It's going to be stupid and hard to cook up some of the tricks you can do with this in standard, but there are tricks you can do. Just in Ether Drip, we just saw Hazaret, which can tap to get creatures with power 2 or less through for unblockability that turn. We actually, in that same set, we saw an uncommon Rakdos vehicle at 4 mana that does the same thing. You can pay 2 mana, tap it, and get a creature through unblocked so long as it's small enough. And this dude is small enough. In other formats, I guess you can use Tetsuko Yumazawa in Pioneer or whatever. Try to get this thing through because that just gets it through for free. So, I don't know, maybe there's tricks and all that, but you got to get this thing out in the first place. If you do try to reanimate it, you probably have to give it haste, and unblockability in the same turn. And there's probably just way better things you could be doing. So the card is a bit of a meme, but 10,000 damage. That's going to kill anyone at the commander table if it does get through. So try to brew up your commander tricks with it, right? Just like a Rogue's Passage gets this through for a character or a player loses the game. So I don't know, dude. Start brewing. I was going to say start your engines. I think we've had enough of that through Ether Drip previous season. But yeah, Jumbo Cactuar looks like a silly Magic card because that's exactly what it is. We'll move on to Cloud Planet's Champion, another Cloud card. This one's playable in standard, but I should point out that this and the next card, which is pretty awesome, dude, we all like, is only available in the starter kit. I didn't see where you could find this in play boosters on Wizards website. It says it's available in the starter kit and appears to be the starter kit only, but we'll look at him. He's all right. He's 5 mana, 3, a white and a red for a 4/4 legendary human soldier mercenary. During your turn, as long as he's equipped, he has double strike and indestructible, and also equip abilities you activate the target cloud costs 2 less to activate. So what's pretty sick about that, to be honest, is that there's plenty of things that you can just equip to this the turn he comes into play. It's kind of lame that you can't just immediately equip a sword to him because most swords cost 3 to activate. That would have been flavorful and fun and thematic and all that, but I guess you could just wait until you have 6 mana to play this out of your command zone. This to me looks like a more fun equipment commander than the one that comes in the command deck, the commander deck. Even though that one does give you Naya, it gives you 3 colors to play, and there's probably fun stuff you can do with that, but either way, the fact that this can come down and immediately equip something, if you can find a way to give it haste, and obviously it's ridiculous. And of course, if the thing that you equip to it, like a lava spur boots or something, gives it haste, that's probably all the better. Like a crystal slipper, I guess that's another thing you could do. But, in standard, I think we have lava spur boots to do that. And suddenly it's attacking haste, double strike, indestructible, 4/4, actually a 5/4, I think if it's wearing the boots. So that could actually be very cool for 5 mana. Just a thing that comes down and swings for 10 out of nowhere. But is it too slow for equipment decks? Are equipment decks just kind of too bad anyway? There's a reason that this is more or less an intro pack Mythic. I guess is a way to put it. It comes in the starter kit. So again, there are reasons. I think we'll get even more clouds and Sephiroths and stuff in this set than the ones we're going to look at today. But as it is, even if it is a little intro packy, I still think it's a pretty powerful looking magic card if you can do it correctly. And there's plenty of ways to play like relatively powerful equipment that you can equip to this immediately. But I said his name, so let's take a look at him. It's Sephiroth, planet's Heir over here. 6 mana for a blue and a black for a 4/4 legendary human avatar soldier with vigilance. When he enters, creatures your opponents control get -2/-2 until end of turn. And whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Sephiroth. So part Massacre Worm, part like Sengir, the Dark Baron, like a little bit of both of those boys. I kind of like it. Altogether, I do kind of like it. This is just like Cloud, a little bit intro packy. You can see he costs 6 mana. He's probably not super playable in standard. He's not the best reanimation target. You probably don't want to ramp into him with anything. So this one's a little bit disappointing, and I can't even make the same arguments I made about Cloud, where it's like, well, you got the right equipment, you're doing the right stuff, you give him haste, and maybe he's all right. I don't know about this dude. I think that we've got like Harvester of Misery if you want, or even Massacre Worm, honestly, if you want this enter the battlefield trigger. But I will say, if you play it and your opponent loses 2 things, and you have a 6/6 Vigilance. Sucks that he doesn't have any other keyword abilities. You think he'd have like Menace or something? No, just Vigilance. But a 6/6 Vigilance can be okay, especially if it took 2 things off the table when it came into play, and potentially even more, if it blows up an entire team's worth of guys. That's kind of a massive nightmare for your opponent. So I do think it's an interesting, like neat little card, a cool iteration of Sephiroth, and, flavor-wise, it probably would do something like this. I could see that. But again, here's hoping that we get like better versions of this card, and I'm almost certain that we will. But actually the best Mythic of the day, I think, is one whose name I'm probably going to butcher. I'm sorry, Final Fantasy XIV players. This is Emet-Selch Unsundered. This is 3 mana, 1 a blue and a black for a 2/4 legendary elder wizard with vigilance. Just throwing that keyword around today. Whenever Emet-Selch enters or attacks, draw a card, then discard a card. At the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 14 or more cards in your graveyard, you may transform Emet-Selch. If you do, you get Hades, Sorcerer of Eld. This is a 6/6 legendary avatar with vigilance, and it has Echo of the Lost. During your turn, listen to this. During your turn, you may play cards from your graveyard. All right, if a card or token would be put into your graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. So that last line of text does make the first line of text on the transform part like a little bit worse. Like you can't put this into play somehow and then start putting a bunch of stuff in your yard. You have to have your yard set up, but I think your yard is somewhat set up because there's 14 cards in it. Like, there's probably plenty of stuff in there that you can play. Lands included, by the way. This allows you to cast spells and play lands the way it's worded. So really, really cool, man. Like, altogether, this is not actually that hard to transform. We see how hard it is to get, 8 cards in the graveyard for Kiora on turn 3. Read, not very hard at all. So starting on turn 4, maybe turn 5, I could see transforming this. And once you do, you've got all of your lands untapped because the thing happens during your upkeep, and just as a result of having cards in your yard, you don't have to pay mana or anything like that. So you've got all your mana untapped and you haven't done a land drop yet. You draw your card for the turn, you can play a land out of your yard, you can start rocking and rolling and doing whatever you want out of your graveyard, which is really, really slick to me, dude. If you have instants in your graveyard, then, once this transforms and your opponent tries to kill it before you move to your draw step and get to your main phase, you can play the instants out of your yard. So you might even be able to play a counter spell to protect this, during your upkeep. That seems like a fun little line to take too. So there's a lot of really cool stuff you can do with this. There's no restriction on the kind of cards you can play from your graveyard. So as long, again, as you can keep this protected, it's really good if you have your graveyard set up correctly. The later in the game you get this, the better, kind of. So sure, it works okay on turn 3 and it's kind of removal resistant. It dies to Go for the Throat and Anoint with Affliction, but get lost and stuff, obviously. But it doesn't die to Bolt effects, Virtue of Persistence, Nowhere to Run, Cut Down. Those are really important spells for this to skip. So I don't know, man. Altogether, I think that you're not paying too much for it. In the meantime, it's just a 2/4 Vigilance, which isn't the most impressive stat line in the world, but it's not too hard to get 14 in your yard. And once you do, you have a 6/6 Vigilance that only really costs you 3 mana. In terms of like what you actually paid for this, just 3 mana for your 6/6 Vigilance. And not to mention ridiculous amounts of card advantage. 14 cards effectively enter your hand when this thing transforms. So yeah, I think this is actually a very good card, not just in Standard, but I might as well say Commander too. If this is in your command zone, that seems busted to me because, in Commander, you could always play this, get it transformed, play a bunch of stuff out of your yard, and then sacrifice this, or I'm sure it will die some way or another, and then stock your graveyard up before you play it out of your command zone again so that you have, enough stuff to play again out of your graveyard. So I don't know, dude. I think in Commander it's a fun card. Don't get me wrong, but man, in Standard, Pioneer maybe, I think that this thing actually has some stuff it can do. And Blue-Black is already, a color combination that wants to put cards in its graveyard or does so as a matter of course anyway, just by playing a bunch of instants and sorceries. I could see Oculus switching over to either Esper or just Blue-Black, There's definitely some options here. So really, really sick looking Magic card that goes with not only Oculus, but like the aforementioned Kiora. There's definitely a list here. Squirming Emergence and stuff like that. Just your mind really can go wild with the stuff that this can do work in. So looks like a great Magic card to me. That again is it for today. Just a reminder that we are not in the official Final Fantasy preview season just yet. They just gave us a little sneak peek of the Commander stuff, little bites of the Standard stuff, and honestly, I don't know how long it's going to sustain me. I am hungry for more Final Fantasy cards, but we're going to have to get through Tarkir Dragonstorm preview season first, which is only in like 4 or 5 weeks, something like that. Not too long away. And once Tarkir comes out, it is a couple of months until Final Fantasy. That set will come out in June. So I would expect, spoilers in kind of mid-May to kind of resume. But from what we've seen so far, the set looks pretty cool to me, man. Hopefully they don't completely fumble the ball from here on out. But, just the 12 cards we saw today, sure, I didn't love all of the designs of every one that we saw. And I feel like they especially did Garland wrong, boy. But they got a chance to make it right. And that card could be better than I gave it credit for, too. There's something about it. But either way, there was a lot of cool stuff today, man. That Chocobo looks ridiculous. Tonberry looks great. Cecil, a 1-mana 2/3 Deathtouch in Standard. Like, there was a lot of amazing stuff to look at today. So let me know how you felt about all of it, what you want to play in Standard, any brew ideas, combos, and stuff like that I didn't go over here. I'd like to hear from you. But apart from that, do all the YouTube stuff. Hit the button shaped like a thumb on your way out. Maybe subscribe to the channel for more previews and deck techs and all kinds of stuff. We just did the top 3 new decks of the week for Ether Drift Week 1. There's a lot of cool stuff in there. So check that out. I'll leave a link in the description, along with a link to Patreon if you want to help me out around here. If you want to support the channel, it's just $1 a month and you'll be able to vote on content. But that's about it for this one, man. I'm excited for more spoilers. I'm really excited for Tarkir, to be honest. But once we get to Final Fantasy, it will be impossible to contain my excitement. Seriously, these cards all look great and I want more of them. But anyway, that's all I've got for today, guys. Just hit me up in the comments section. Let me know how you feel about stuff, and I will catch you cats later. I'm Deb from the place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.